You're listening to Love and Libido with me, your host, Dr. Emily Jamia. The goal of this podcast is to educate and inspire. My hope is that you will learn tools to create connection and cultivate passion, both within yourself and in your relationships. Here's what's coming up on today's episode. Are you a parent who is dreading the birds and bees talk with your child? Could you use some insight about how kids think about sex in 2022? Want to learn more about why we need to be concerned about the fact that teens are having less sex than ever before? Then you need to listen to today's episode. I am thrilled to welcome today's guest. Dr. Logan Levkoff is an internationally recognized expert on sexuality, parenting, and relationships. For 2 decades, she has been designing and implementing sex education programs in schools and organizations across the country. A thought leader in the field, Logan frequently appears on television and was the sexuality expert for the first 3 seasons of Married at First Sight. Logan is also the author of multiple parenting books. She received her PhD in human sexuality, marriage, and family life education from NYU and holds an MS in human sexuality education from the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Logan, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time since I've seen your face either in person or, via Zoom.
I know. It's like we follow each other on social media, and I know we've exchanged a few emails, but we used to bump elbows at conferences, and obviously those have not been happening over the past few years. And so it is really great to connect with you as well.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So Logan, I want to hear, before we dive into this very important conversation, a little bit about what got you into the field of sex education and why that was such an interest for you.
It's a good question. I mean, and we need to go back a long time. Truth be told, I actually don't think, like, when I was a kid, I ever anticipated spending my life in the world of human sexuality. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to put my big mouth to use, lawyer, politics, something. But growing up in the early to mid 1990s and becoming a teen at that time, it was this really interesting moment culturally where HIV and AIDS was all over the news. It was finally this moment where it wasn't being talked about as solely something that impacted certain groups of people in certain demographics. And my parents, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to get involved, not just with HIV and AIDS fundraising, but education. And my mom and her closest friend helped alongside our local community hospital, who had an infectious disease program and had a big HIV population, decided to get involved and create AIDS awareness programs in our town. And the idea was that, if you were trained as a peer HIV and AIDS educator, you helped your own community, but also had the opportunity to go into other schools. So when I was in 10th grade, I found condoms and bananas on our dinner table one day. And my parents said, "This is how you use a condom. Next week, you're going to go to training to become a peer HIV and AIDS educator." And sort of that was the entree into the field. But what I found was that I had, and I hope this doesn't seem too narcissistic, but I had this weird talent at making uncomfortable sex comfortable. I didn't think that sexuality was necessarily going to be the entry point for me, but I really loved it. And I found myself graduating from high school and going to college and finding that my peers and I, who were otherwise really smart people, making really decisions about sex. And I found myself yet again stepping into the role of, peer educator.
Yeah.
And not having any idea that could actually be a career, but, thus 20 years later, maybe a few more than 20 years later.
You don't look it. Yeah, here we are. I think that is so cool. And so I think it's amazing that your parents were so open about sex. And I think things have come full circle, because now I see that you've involved your teenage son in some of your advocacy about sexual health. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, it's funny because I wouldn't necessarily say that my parents were so liberal that we were talking about sex all the time, because really we weren't. I mean, I remember the conversation my mom and I had about menstruation and where we were and what we were eating. And like, I remember those moments as like big individual moments. I don't remember there being lots of them, but interestingly enough, it was actually my dad that always told my sister and I how important sex and sexuality were, and that, whenever we were going to make decisions, he would be okay with them as long as it wasn't at the behest of others. It was something we wanted to do, and that we were emotionally and physically protected. And again, that wasn't like a heavy-handed message. It didn't take place a lot, but it was clearly poignant enough that it stuck with us. So I think that that's the part that allowed them to be okay with having, this conversation about HIV and AIDS.
Right.
My I having two children, one is very comfortable talking about all things publicly. The other is sort of like a behind the scenes kind of kid. So if you hear stories about one and not the other, it's because one has given me consent to talk about him and the other one does not, and that's perfectly okay, right?
Right.
So yeah, my son Maverick has also really enjoys using his voice and talking about things that typically make people uncomfortable, and had an opportunity to be an Amaze ambassador for 2 years, and be one of their peer leaders. And he and I got to actually sit right here and do a podcast together, which was really fun.
I think it's amazing.
On how we navigate these issues at home. I would say that obviously our house is not a typical house, and that all of the things people would never talk about at the dinner table, we talk about pretty openly. My kids have been in the car with me while, someone calls, and it's like not in any like violation of privacy, but like, pitching products or things. And it's really, it's quite funny that they just look at me like, I can't believe this is our life.
Right. That is so funny. Yeah. And I think I grew up to an extent kind of similarly to you. My dad is an OBGYN, so sex was never really that taboo of a topic. And kind of like your kids hearing you, I grew up in the backseat of the car hearing him take calls from women with all kinds of, pregnancy related, but also sexual issues. But I mean, I do think that lends itself to a level of comfort around talking about sex because it is normalized. And so I think it's really cool that, you grew up and I hear what you're saying, that it's not like your parents were overly open when it came to sex, but I hear in your message that there was a lot of sex positivity, which at the time that, we were coming of age is a lot more than a lot of people can say.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think the other piece of it is that I was raised with, and I think probably because it was my sister and me, and, we were girls and there were no double standards in our home. So we were always told that, whatever anyone else wanted to do, we could do too. Right. There weren't different rules for us. And so that really translated into a nice amount of, ego, a healthy amount of ego, which suggested that like we could say or do anything. And I think that we really ran with that. It never occurred to me that a teenager couldn't or shouldn't talk about sex like that never even crossed my mind.
If you liked this video, drop me a like and subscribe below. Share with a friend who might find it interesting. You can also listen to this in podcast form anywhere podcasts are streamed by searching for Love and Libido with Dr. Emily Jamia. Finally, follow me across all social media channels at Dr. Emily Jamia for daily emotional and physical intimacy tips.